Okay, so yeah, I will now turn it over to Toni to get us started on her presentation.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining today. Let me share my screen. Okay. So today I'm going to be presenting on, oh, sorry, definitely on the wrong screen, but that's okay. How do we get out of here? There we go. So I'm going to be presenting on navigating medical school applications. I'm going to talk a little bit about the requirements and the application process and a little bit about my own experience applying to medical school. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or we'll have a question and answer section at the end. But yeah, I'm pretty open about my own experience applying to medical school. It was definitely stressful. So anyone that's applying, feel free to ask me anything and to reach out either during or after the presentation. Okay, so just a little bit of overview on what we're going to talk about today. So first, I'm going to give like a general overview over medical school applications and kind of how things have changed with COVID. Then I'm going to go over some requirements for med school. And then I'll talk about the application process. So primary, secondary applications. And then I'm going to go over the interview process. And then lastly, some tips, tricks, and reminders when applying to medical school. So the first thing is why apply to medical school. These are just some of the reasons that like I listed for why I applied to medical school and why you might want to apply to medical school. But they include improving the health and well-being of others, improving our current public health system. Medicine and medical school is like increasingly becoming intersectional, and you can, become a leader in public health systems with an MD as well. Constantly interacting with others was something that was a big reason for me in wanting to become a doctor and applying to medical school. As a doctor, you're going to be interacting with other humans every single day, and that's something that I really value. So that was a big reason for me. Working with your hands is another reason. This is more for maybe the surgeons that are in medical school, which is, I don't think, going to be me, but doing procedures might be cool. But I do have some friends that do want to be surgeons, and they really value the ability to work with your hands. And then lastly, learning about science and the human body. I find the human body fascinating, and I'm really excited to be learning about, undergrad was great, but in medical school, I'll be learning about something that's really important and interesting to me, and knowing that the classes and everything that I learn will be applicable to my job. And then I put some little tips like don't go to medical school just for the money and the prestige. There are other fields that if these two things are like the things that you care about most, you can do other things that aren't medical school, that aren't a really long process. And then don't go to medical school just for external pressures. And by that, I mean other people, maybe like you feel pressured by your parents or someone else to go to medical school, but you should go because you want to go and because you love medicine, and not because you feel that you're expected to go to medical school. And then something that I wanted to touch on was this term that has been coined called the Fauci effect. And that is the increase in medical school applications this year. This past year, I think that there was maybe a 20% increase on average, with a lot of schools having around a 20% increase in medical school applications, and some, especially competitive schools, having like even a 50% increase. And that's a big deal compared to the typical 3% increase from year to year. And while we can't actually explain this and attribute or explain what has caused this Fauci effect. People have theorized that it's because of the pandemic, and because the pandemic has highlighted a few things like the crucial role that physicians have played and play in healthcare and society, as well as the physician shortage that we have. We need more doctors. That was very evident during peak COVID. And also how pandemic has demonstrated how racism is a public health crisis. And while that's been a thing for a while, this is something that's more talked about now. And people might want to apply to medical school to get more into social justice work and decrease healthcare disparities. And then also the pandemic may have given some individuals more free time to apply. So maybe they're working from home or they got laid off and they had more free time and they decided, oh, I'll just apply now since I was going to apply 2 years from now, but I'm not working anymore. And then the decreased costs in applying and interviewing with interviews being virtual, it doesn't cost as much to fly out of state and interview and pay for the hotel. So applicants might also be applying to more schools in general. Also, some medical schools did make the MCAT optional. I think Stanford was one of these schools. And so that probably, if a student hadn't taken the MCAT yet, maybe they just decided, oh, I'll go ahead and apply. And in general, I think not only are we seeing a change in medical school applicants, but also a change in the way that medical schools are selecting their applicants as they're becoming more holistic. And you can see that by some medical schools making the MCAT optional. But this Fauci effect is just one of the reasons why med school applications might be more stressful and why some tips and tricks might be helpful. And so next, I'm going to go over some requirements for med school. First, I'll talk about briefly some pre-med class requirements. And med schools typically require 2 semesters with lab of biology, gen chem, organic chemistry, and physics. And then they recommend 1 semester of biochemistry and 2 semesters of math and English. Some additional common pre-med courses include statistics, psychology, genetics, other advanced biology, science courses, and foreign language. You don't have to take these, but they are common courses. And lastly, you want to also make sure that you're taking whatever else you're interested in. I double majored in Spanish, and those were some of my favorite classes. And med schools want to see that you're not only studying the pre-med requirements, but you're also studying something that you're passionate about, whether that is science or not. Next, I'll briefly go over the MCAT. There are 4 sections of this test that's typically required for most medical schools, although, like I said, it's changing a little bit. And the 4 sections are, we have chemistry and physics, basically, biology and biochemistry. And then you have your reading or critical analysis, reasoning skills, which is called CARS. And then the last section is basically psychology and sociology. This test does cost $300 to take, about $300 to take and register. And the scores range from 472 to 528, with 500 being the median. So it's scored on a percentile based off of how other people do on that same test date. And then some study resources that many people use are Kaplan, Books and Practice Tests, AAMC, and Princeton Review books and practice tests as well. I personally used Kaplan books. I also took an online course and had a tutor as well. The course was a little bit expensive, but very helpful for me. Everyone has their own study strategy. I also used some class notes and some flashcards, or I made some flashcards while studying. I also made like an Excel spreadsheet for each of the different sections. So if anyone has any questions about MCAT studying strategies, feel free to reach out, and I can also send you the spreadsheet that I made. And then next, I'm going to talk about applications. So there are two components to med school applications. You have your primary application, and that's kind of your general common application. It includes all of your demographic, contact, parental information, and as well as transcripts from your school, MCAT. There's a work and activity section, which we'll go over more later, and then your personal statement. And so this does cost, as you can see, applying to medical school is a little pricey, but the initial fee for technically the first school is $170, and then it's $40 for each additional school that you want to send this AMCAS application to. And AMCAS will waive your fee. I'm not sure if this has changed with COVID, if they're being more helpful, but I know that if you do qualify, you can apply to get these fees waived. And then secondaries, these are each medical school will send secondaries. Generally, all applicants will receive a secondary from each school that you send your AMCAS application to. Some schools do have like MCAT cutoffs, or they do screen. That's usually like you have to get maybe a 500 on the MCAT, but most schools don't. Most schools will send a secondary to everybody, unless maybe you've received some disciplinary action or something. But these fees range from $30 to $200. I think the most expensive one that I saw was $150. Most cost around $50 to $120. And some schools will waive this as well. Once again, I'm not sure if things have changed with COVID, but a couple schools did waive for me. And if you qualify, you can definitely get more of these fees waived as well. And these are essays that are unique to each medical school. We can go over this more in depth in a bit as well. So now I'm going to talk about the work and activities section of the primary application part of med school applications. And so this is up to 15 experiences, with 3 of them being most meaningful experiences. So that means that for 3 of your experiences, you want to expand on how they have impacted you and what you learned from these experiences. Most, you don't have to do 15 experiences. I believe I had 12. Most applicants, I believe, have at least 10. So something that I always say is quality over quantity, that you'd rather have 10 meaningful experiences that you can talk about and draw on, rather than having 15 experiences and kind of spreading yourself thin and not having as much to go in depth about in your most meaningful experiences. And these experiences will include your employment, so that's paid and unpaid, research, volunteer experiences, any awards and publications, and any extracurricular activities. So I danced while I was in college, and so I talked about being a part of a dance group as one of my extracurricular activities. And in each of them, you want to describe the details. So what you did, with whom you worked, what you learned and achieved through each experience, and how long you were at each experience, or maybe how many hours you worked per week at each experience. And I believe that the work and activity section limits you to 4 of each type. So like 4 of research, 4 of volunteer. And that helps you kind of limit, if you have a lot of experiences, that helps you limit and decide what's most important. And then I have an example of a most meaningful experience, just because it is, this for me was one of the most stressful parts of the primary application. It was a lot to write about 12 plus experiences. And so this person wrote about shadowing in pediatric heme onc ward of a hospital. And they wrote about talking with a couple mentors, one of the fellows and one of the physicians, and that they learned about the life balance, the work-life balance in being a doctor, especially on heme onc ward, and how to deal with death. And that's something that is even more important in a field like heme onc. And so for this, he or she is showing the reader basically what they learned and how this experience has been meaningful to them. And then I included a couple other examples of experiences that are not most meaningful. And this is two different ways of how people applied. And so the first one, this person kind of listed bullet points of what they learned and what they did in their World Health Organization community service volunteering. And then the second example was teaching and tutoring. And so this is kind of how I did it. I gave a short little paragraph for each of my experiences. This person wrote what they did and what they learned from leading discussions and being a TA. Does anyone have any questions so far on anything I've touched on, primary application or work activities section? If not, we can come back later.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard kind of conflicting advice, which is there's some instances where it's okay to bullet point, and then generally it's technically not advised that you should do that. When do you decide whether or not an experience should be like just bullet pointed versus that you should actually just write like a paragraph description?
Yeah, so I didn't write any bullet points. I think that, obviously it depends on the reader. Some readers prefer like to look at a bulleted list because it's easier for them to read. I would definitely advise against it for the most meaningful experiences. For those you kind of want to tell a story maybe and explain more about, or give a little scenario that shows what you've learned and what you've gained from that experience. And then for the shorter ones, like the not three most meaningful experiences, I think bullet points, if you prefer that, then I don't think that would be that would necessarily count against you. But I personally chose to do a paragraph, mostly because I like tying. I think I found it easier to tie together like what I did and then what I learned from it in a paragraph rather than in bullets. And so I think that that's the route that people go most often. But I think it's more of a personal choice.
I have a question that Toni, you're welcome to answer it, but I also welcome others that are attending this to answer it. But what recommendations do you have for different types of activities that people might want to engage in that could help develop these meaningful experiences? And I'm going to add the context of like people who are underrepresented in medicine are more likely to have like caretaking responsibilities, and so it's kind of hard to figure out like what are the opportunities available that don't add to an already overwhelming plate, but would create these avenues to develop these meaningful experiences that could go into this application.
Yeah, and that's a really good question because some institutions and situations, obviously put people at a higher disadvantage. For example, like attending a university that has extensive research opportunities that a student there might seem at a higher advantage than someone else who does have caretaking responsibilities. And I'll touch a little bit later on some potential gap year experiences, but there are several. I think now COVID has an advantage of COVID is that things are remote. So there is remote scribing, and that can be part-time or full-time. I know Scribe America has some part-time remote scribing positions. And so that's basically taking notes for a doctor or a nurse practitioner at home from your computer. And like I said, that can be a few days a week or it can be full-time. And then there's also research experiences. Those can be remote or in person as well, and part and full-time. And so I'm actually doing a part-time research with COVID where I do like 1 day a week. I will actually go in person and like help test for COVID. And yeah, so I think things like that are very flexible in comparison to maybe full-time research positions. Those might be beneficial for people to do as well. Volunteering, community health, I know is like just an example of volunteering experience. That is one, I think they require one time a month to volunteer at that clinic. And that's something that can be really meaningful and that you might have a lot to write about, even though it's only once a month. Yeah, so I don't know if anybody else has any suggestions or recommendations.
Yeah, I
Go ahead.
can add to that a little. What I've seen, so I've attended some virtual conversations with AdComs, so medical school admission deans of admissions, and a lot of what they said is, again, with the push for more holistic review of applicants, and I think COVID has sort of highlighted this as well. There's a general acceptance that, yes, there are these experiences like research volunteering, physician shadowing, that is typically recommended for pre-med applicants. But again, if in a given year, 50,000 students are applying and all of them have these experiences, it kind of becomes very generic. And so there's the recommendation that if a student is someone who has caretaking responsibilities, that those can be considered meaningful experiences that they can talk about. Like that is an experience that is personal to the student. And if you can talk about it in a way that shows not only how it's influenced you, but how it's influenced your decision to pursue medicine, it can be meaningful and is generally recommended to also talk about in your application. And I know some schools do have like a disadvantage statement where you can talk about like anything in your personal life that sort of maybe hindered your ability to do research, for example, or that's made it difficult to get these other experiences. And then also just looking at schools, and I know some schools prioritize research. For example, Feinberg, U Chicago, a lot of the Ivy League medical schools, R01 schools will typically look for extensive research opportunities. So you can also tailor your school choices based on your experiences. If you're someone who hasn't been able to have much research, then you perhaps wouldn't want to apply to schools where they report that 98% of their incoming class had research experiences. So those can be ways that you can also kind of maximize your chances of getting into med school based on your own experiences.
Yeah, just like Nemo said, the work and activities by no means is limited to clinical experiences. And you can definitely draw on really anything that you've done in your life and how that will or has prepared you to be a doctor and take care of others in the future. Med schools, well, a lot of med schools now are moving away from or I guess they're valuing a lot of non-traditional applicants and understanding that there are experiences outside of medicine that make people well-rounded applicants, and that they're asking in the applications to showcase that. Yeah, I see. Yeah, okay. You're welcome, Samantha. Next, I'll talk about personal statement. And this is 5,300 characters max, and which is, I believe, like a page and a half. And this is where you can kind of show a little bit about your personality and show the readers something that might not be mentioned in another section of the application. And so through your personal statement, you really just want to show the reader something. You might want to tell a story about a personal challenge, or talk about a mentor that you interacted with, and why you are passionate about going to medical school or becoming a physician, You want them to kind of understand your drive for medicine. And this is also where you can stand out from other applicants. So you can also touch on, any hardships or anything that you've experienced in your life. You just kind of want the reader to get to know you and learn a little bit about your passion for medicine. Next, I'll talk about letters of recommendation. And so it's recommended to have 2 from science professors and 1 from a non-science professor. This is definitely not required. You can also ask lab research PIs, employers and or doctors you work with. I actually only had 1 science professor. I had 4 total. I had 1 science professor, 1 from a lab PI, and then 2 from my Spanish professors. And that was because I believed that those were the people that could write the best letters about me, rather than like trying to find another science professor that maybe like didn't know me as well. Some schools do say that they don't want more than 3. I didn't encounter that at all. I think most schools said that they didn't want more than 5. And so I had 4 and it wasn't an issue. And it wasn't an issue that I only had 1 from a science professor as well. And then something that is optional is a pre-medical committee letter. And this is usually just for traditional applicants, which means that you're applying out of undergrad or maybe grad school that has a pre-medical advising office. And they basically just write a note that they like support you in going to medical school, but definitely not required and is not something that non-traditional applicants do. And then some tips for getting letters of recommendation: identify classes that you like and get to know your professors. Ask them early also. A lot of professors and doctors and employers are really busy. And especially if you're kind of in a typical pre-med situation, a lot of professors and doctors are writing multiple letters of recommendation. So you want to ask them early. You don't want them to say no because they don't have time to do so because you asked too late. And then you can provide them with content too. A lot of them asked for my resume, my personal statement. You can also provide them with points that you would like them to make. Some of them will like maybe ask you to draft a couple paragraphs or something with bullet points, which can be helpful to them. Next, I'll talk about creating your list of medical schools. And this was something that I struggled with because there are so many, and I didn't want to overwhelm myself by applying to a bunch of them, but I also wanted to make sure that I was giving myself all of the opportunities that I could have. It's recommended to apply to 15 to 25. I was somewhere in the middle of that. I know people that applied to 15 and got into medical school. I know people that applied to 30 to 34 and like both did and didn't get in. So it really is kind of all about what you want to do. Like I wouldn't apply to a medical school that you don't want to go to. But what to look for in creating your list is mission, location, cost of attendance, things that are important to you. So for me, I really wanted to be in an urban setting. I wanted to have diverse patient populations. So those were things that I looked for in applying to medical school. I also, this is definitely not like required, but I use this website called Medical School Chance Predictor. And it basically, you put in your like GPA and your MCAT, and it kind of tells you, it categorizes medical schools by whether they're like target or maybe a reach or like an undershoot for you. And I definitely didn't pay too much attention to it. Like I applied to some reach schools, some far reach, a lot of my target schools, and some undershoots. But it was helpful for me in just kind of like organizing them in my mind. I also wanted to be realistic about grades and my MCAT score and not apply to too many like far reaches. But, medical school is also a lot about luck. And if there's a school that you really love, I definitely would recommend applying because you never know. yeah, obviously like medical schools are moving away from caring a lot about GPA and MCAT, which is great. They're becoming more holistic. So don't pay too much attention to the grades and the MCAT. If you really do love a school, apply for it. And then some pre-medical advising resources or services. I personally used my undergraduate pre-medical. We had a counselor. So I used that a little bit. And then there are also outside advising services. So one of them I knew of was Robertson Pre-Medical Advising. I knew of that through my last job that I did. But these are by no means required. You don't have to use an advising service. I didn't find my undergraduate pre-health profession advising office too helpful, if I'm being honest. And I found it more helpful just to talk to current students and like other people that were applying with me. And then next thing I'm going to talk about is secondary applications. And these are school-specific online portals. And like I said, most schools will send you their secondary applications. And they have their own cost as well. But if you can't afford this, like obviously AMCAS does provide resources for you to apply to get these fees waived. And some schools will already do that as well. And like I said, I'm not sure if things have changed with COVID. So if anyone also has any experience with getting fees waived, please add to this, because I'm not sure how things have changed with COVID. Some of you guys might be going through this now. But when I was applying, they had on the MCAS website, there was a section where you could apply to get these fees waived. And then some of the common questions that you'd find in secondary applications, some of them are essays and some of them are like bullet points. They'll ask why this school, or how will you help this school like to achieve its mission, describe a stressful situation or a specific experience. And a lot of them do ask similar questions. So you can definitely modify essays to be applicable to several schools. Don't copy and paste, because I do know of people that have copy and pasted and accidentally said the name of one school, said the name of a different school when they were applying to another school, and admissions offices won't like reading that. So definitely edit and proofread. You're going to be writing a lot for these secondary applications. I had a couple friends of mine that I thought were better writers than me proofread my essays, and that was helpful. And then also be timely. Some people say to have like a 2-week turnaround time from when you receive the secondary application to send it in. I personally didn't do that. And it ended up being fine. I still got a couple interviews from schools that I sent in the secondaries late. I think that in general, I received secondaries in like mid-July, and I had all of them sent back in by Labor Day. But you can definitely prioritize which schools you want to send first. Maybe like you want to get in some schools that like are at the top of your list. You do want them to make the 2-week rule, and that's okay. So you can kind of create a list on your priorities and like the order of things that you want to send in. Some schools do have requirements like that you have to get it in within 3 weeks of them sending it to you, but for most schools, for me, that wasn't the case. And then something I'll touch on briefly is the Casper test. And this is required by only a handful of medical schools. So like Northwestern didn't require this, but UIC did. And it's a situational judgment admissions test that evaluates personality, ethics, professionalism, communication, and empathy. And it's 90 minutes total. It's online. I did it like on my own. I signed up for a time to do it on my own computer. And they ask you to respond to word-based and video scenarios. And they're normally like a little bit controversial, like in terms of professionalism or ethics. They ask you to kind of take a stance on a situation. This isn't really something that you can study for and practice for. But so what I did was maybe a day before the Casper exam, I kind of reviewed some practice questions, thought about how I might answer them, and then also maybe practice typing because it is timed and you have to type up your responses pretty fast, but it was nothing too crazy. And then this did cost, I believe, $10 to take it, and then 10 to send to each school. And so I think 5 of my schools required it, which would end up being $60 total. The next thing I'll talk about is interviews. And there are several different types of interviews. There's your traditional style, and that's kind of sitting one-on-one with your interviewer for 30 minutes on average, could be 20, could be 50, and that's open or closed file. So that means that they either have seen and read your application beforehand, or they haven't. And so they might ask you more general questions about yourself because they haven't read your personal statement or your work and activities experiences. And then you have your multiple mini interview style, which is similar to the Casper exam. And these are, I honestly really enjoyed the multiple mini interview style of interviewing. These are typically closed file, and it's done in a rotation. So for example, for one of mine, I was in person, but they did this online as well. I stood outside of a room, and for 2 minutes, I read a prompt and thought about how I would answer it. The prompts are normally, they range from general, why do you want to go to medical school, or scenarios like ethical, professional. They might ask you to take a stance on something. And so then after those 2 minutes, you go into the room and you sit down with the interviewer and talk for 5 to 7 minutes about your answer to that prompt. They might have follow-up questions. And in some of these, I actually had to act, which was funny. I pretended to be a physician, I think, and was talking to a parent. I was a pediatrician, or in another one, I was a med student. And I thought that was going to be scary, but it was honestly kind of fun. And there are 7 or 8 of these total in each MMI interview. So, if you mess up on one, it's kind of nice because then you have like 6 others to kind of make up for that. And then there are also partner/group exercises. In one of my interviews, I think they asked me an interviewer watched another applicant and I like create a list of something. And those are for the most part pretty chill. Sometimes they ask you to like build something with a couple other interviewers or a couple other applicants. And they just want to see like how well you work with others. And when we talk about interviews, when you're invited to interview, that's a big step. Know that like that school like thinks that you're qualified to attend, and really like now you just want to be yourself and show how you might be a good fit at their school. You can prepare by doing mock interviews. I personally didn't do any. I kind of just reviewed questions, thought about how I would answer the typical ones, like why I wanted to go to medical school, and then for each individual school, why I wanted to go to that medical school. And have questions prepared. This is also the time for medical schools to convince you that that you should go to their school. So ask all the questions, have some good questions prepared. I also included this photo just because this is your typical like interview attire, at least for in-person ones. For the virtual ones, I don't know if it matters what pants you wear, but yeah, this is kind of along the lines of what I saw people wearing on interview days. And then post-interview tips. My biggest tip would be that, it's over. Be proud of yourself. You did as well as you could. And don't try not to dwell too much about things you said. Be patient. A lot of it's just like playing the waiting game and waiting to hear. But some schools some schools will tell you if they don't want updates or thank you notes, they'll be explicit on that. But otherwise, you can write thank you notes to the interviewers. If they're traditional interviews, you'll get their emails. And then you can send updates or letters of interest if you want to, if you have something to say, like you just started a new job, or you got your grades back, or something meaningful that you want to update the school on after interviewing. And that's a lot of schools do like that, because it shows that, you know, you're interested, and it kind of reminds them that, you know, they're still waiting to get back to you. Does anyone have any questions on anything I've talked about so far? The interview, I think I saw a question. Anna said, what are they looking for in group activities / interviews? So what I would say is that they kind of want to see what role you'd play in groups. And in med schools, they have, some of the classes are team-based and group-based. And so they just want to see that you're not like overpowering anybody, that you're not you're not taking other people's interests into consideration. They just want to see that you're good in a group setting, that you kind of ask other people questions, you offer some input, and then you communicate well with the other students. To me, that was nothing too crazy. I didn't see anything like, you know, bad. Like, I think that they just kind of are interested in seeing how you work in groups and how you work well with others. Does anyone have any other questions about interviews or anything I've touched on so far?
I have a quick question. When is it recommended to take the Casper test? Is it that you are told by the school that this is a requirement, or do you have to take initiative and like figure out which of your schools require it and then just do it on your own?
Yeah, so it is a little bit do it on your own. I believe that the schools that required it emailed me, like reminding me to take it. And if I remember correctly, there was like a pretty wide time frame in when I could take it. I think I took it in July or August when I was applying. I registered like a month beforehand. I think you can take it up to November or December of the year you're applying. And I'm also not sure if timeline has changed because of COVID. I know a lot of med schools pushed back deadlines, so it might even be later than that. And yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the Casper exam, mostly because it was only required by like 5 of the schools that I applied to. And also, I don't know if I said this or not, but some schools aren't yet using it to assess applicants. They're kind of just using it to see if they should use something like that in their application process, like next year, for a more holistic approach. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And then it looks like Araceli has a question. There are some more questions in the chat.
Yeah. Did I get any outside of the norm questions during my interviews? I did. I had a couple interesting interview experiences. One of them asked me to speak Spanish because I speak Spanish. And I think that I don't know, maybe they just they wanted to make sure that I wasn't lying or something, but they started speaking to me in Spanish and I was a little caught off guard. But that was they tested me. I was totally not expecting that, but I answered in Spanish and he was like, some people they say they speak Spanish and they actually don't. Also, I had a couple questions that were name some, what do you think are the most important medical innovations in the last 100 years? Which threw me off a little bit just because I hadn't really thought about that. One of them asked me in a traditional interview with a one-on-one interview where he wanted me to take a stance on, I could pick any specific controversial topic and we would debate it. So I think we ended up debating abortion or something, which was a little bit also a little bit caught me off guard, but it was fun to debate that. And it was really interesting to hear, other people's opinions on topics. Let me read these questions. It's time to get to know you outside. Yeah, some schools, most schools that I interviewed at were very chill, I'd say. And it was clear that the interviewers wanted me to do well, and they wanted just to learn more about me, and really gave me the opportunity to kind of like talk about what I wanted to talk about. So yeah, they were just kind of trying to get to know me outside of what's on my application. I didn't interview at any schools. Obviously, like I talked about some questions that threw me off guard, but I didn't interview at any schools that I felt were like competitive or that like made me feel bad during the interview. Cause I know I've had some friends that didn't have as great of experiences, but mine were all, for the most part, pretty great. How soon after the MCAS opened did I submit? I submitted, I think it opened May 30th, my year. And I submitted like June 5th, around the time. But yeah, I think I answered all the questions in the chat. Does anyone have any more questions about anything so far?
There's one more from Jackie. It says, did you have any speed dating interviews?
I don't think so. No, I'd say the closest to speed dating was like the multiple mini interview style. The predictor, oh, sorry, but yeah, I didn't really have any speed dating interviews, but I've also heard about people doing that as well. And then the predictor with my actual results was not very accurate. I mean, it was, but like I think that there were a couple times that I was surprised to maybe like not get an interview from a school that I wanted to get an interview from. And then there were a couple times where I did get an interview from a school that I maybe didn't expect it. So yeah, I wouldn't say that like, don't put too much emphasis on the predictor. It just kind of helped me like organize the medical schools in my mind. Okay, and then I wanted to just touch briefly on gap years because I know that like delaying medical school can be scary, and like the thought of, you know, becoming a doctor when you're like 30 is scary, but I strongly encourage people to take gap years. And now medical schools are, you know, really valuing non-traditional experiences. And so I put some typical gap year experiences in here. I included a picture of Oak Street Health because that's where I scribed. I did a year of scribing before this, and I really enjoyed that. I thought it prepared me well for medical school and also gave me a lot to talk about in interviews. And then obviously my second gap year is this trainee program, you know, working for the Center for Health Equity Transformation. And I've enjoyed both of my gap years so much. Like I almost wish I had another to do something like this, but definitely encourage you to take gap years and do what you want to do. It really doesn't have to be anything related to medicine. Like Nemo and I have said before, like medical schools they want you to be yourself. They want to see what you're interested in and what you're passionate about. So like if you're passionate about traveling, like travel. I know with COVID that wasn't really a thing, but I know people that like worked in completely different jobs because they wanted to, or they wanted to save money. That's also a plus for a gap year, but do what you're interested in doing during your gap year. That's the time that you want to give yourself to enjoy before starting medical school. Not that you won't enjoy medical school, but you won't have as much time to do other things. And then choosing a medical school. This, you know, some people can be lucky and have a choice of medical schools. And so my advice would be to talk to current students, especially maybe like students that you can connect with during interviews. A lot of students will like give you their information. Some medical schools, which I found helpful, did like a pre-interview discussion or like dinner with current students, and some of them will do that specifically for underrepresented students, which is great because then they can see like how well supported they are by the school. Also just assessing the school's values and missions with your own interests and passions. So like I really wanted to be in, you know, like an urban setting. I wanted to have a diverse population, specifically like a Spanish speaking population. I also wanted a school that wasn't so research focused. I wanted a more primary care focused research school or medical school because that's what I valued more. Curriculum and specific programs too. You can look at like volunteer opportunities, opportunities to have a student run clinic or work with specific communities where that med school is located. And then personal factors also, your support system, thinking about how, if being close to family and friends is important to you. Cost of attendance obviously is something that's huge. Some schools will offer very good financial aid. Some won't as much. Some will be more expensive because they're out of state. Weather, that might be important to you too. And location. So those, you definitely want to make sure that you are being honest with yourself, and that where you see yourself being the happiest and what you value the most, you definitely want to honor. And then I put this picture of University of Illinois at Chicago, because that's where I will be next year. And I also was recently accepted to the urban medicine program, and so that was a big reason for me in applying to UIC Chicago, because I really valued that they had a program there that was specifically for working with urban communities. It honestly like wasn't my first choice, and it ended up obviously working out. I'm really excited to go there. I first thought that I didn't want to be in Chicago, and then COVID hit, and now I'm like very happy to be close to my family and friends. So just know that it all works out, and that, I don't know, that things can change, and some things that you might have thought were important might not end up being important in the future. And then lastly, I just have some reminders that everyone's on a different path. Some people are taking more time to apply to medical school, and definitely apply for application fee waivers. I hopefully covered most of what everything costs, but obviously applying to medical school is very expensive, and there are ways to make that cheaper for yourself. So if you can do that, definitely take advantage of that. Talk to people, talk to any friends, family who have experienced applying to medical school. Reach out to me with any questions that you might have, and hopefully I can answer them. Use sources like SDN, which is Student Doctor Network, and Reddit wisely. These are a lot of applicants will like go on and write things, and while it can be really helpful, also know that like maybe not everybody is using these, so there's a response bias there. Take care of yourself too. Applying to medical school can be really stressful, and you want to take time for yourself, give yourself some time to breathe. And then just note that a lot of it is luck. Like if an interviewer or an admissions person is like having a bad day and reading your application, you might not get an interview, or they might find something in your application that resonates with them. And so just not to be too harsh on yourself, because a lot of it is just really about luck. And now I know we only have a few minutes, but if anyone has any more questions, I'm going to see what else is in the chat. I am very happy. I'm staying in Chicago too, Maggie. I'll be back to visit, obviously, when we're back in person. Does anyone have any more questions?
I guess one quick question that I have is, did you apply to any DO schools?
I did not apply to any DO schools. And yeah, I did want to touch on DO schools during this presentation, but I also am not too familiar with the process and wasn't sure that there would be time. I had some friends that applied to DO schools, and things are obviously like changing now with STEP being pass fail. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but it's basically like the big scary exam. And DO schools, you basically get similar training to MD. And so things are definitely changing directions. I'd say like if you want to apply to DO schools, definitely do it. Because I know people that go to DO schools too that are very happy there. And especially if you want to be orthopedic doctor, there's a lot of DO school, or a lot of orthopedic doctors are DOs. I don't know. Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all for taking the time to listen today. And like I said, if any of you are applying to medical school, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions, and hopefully I can help.
Okay, thank you, Toni.
Toni.
I will send, I guess I can disclose this now. Our next speaker will be Cynthia in June. I do need to figure out when that date will be, but I will send the email. And then this was also recorded, so I will also share the recording once it's made available. But thank you, Toni, for walking us through this lengthy process that I am currently struggling through as well. Yeah, and again, as Toni just said, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot her an email. So Toni, would it be okay for me to include your email in the, okay.
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.